There is a myth in the creative industry that the only way to grow and to make more money is to quote unquote scale, or to grow a team, start an agency, get into education and coaching. So in this episode of the Profitable Creatives podcast, I want to talk about why that's not true, how I got caught in this trap, and what I have decided to do instead. Hello and welcome to the Profitable Creatives podcast. This is the podcast where passion meets profitability. I am your host, Emily Kim. I'm a former software engineer turned brand photographer and business educator and coach. This podcast is for creative service providers who want to build a business that is as fulfilling as it is profitable. On this podcast, I am pulling back the curtain on what it actually takes to run a creative business through stories of my own, running my own brand photography business, as well as bringing on guest experts to talk about their journeys and their stories. Going back to scaling, I think a lot of people, myself included, really glorify the idea of running a team. That seems to be the obvious next step. You get into business as a photographer, a copywriter, whatever. The next most logical step must be like, oh, well, I should probably hire somebody to help me with this, right? Another photographer, another copywriter to work under me, whatever. What I want to talk about today is how that's not the only path, in that you can run a successful, profitable business as a solo entrepreneur. I am not saying that you need to do everything yourself. That would be crazy. But you don't need employees. You don't need to have a huge team if you don't want to. You can run a lean business. So first, let's start by debunking some myths around what scaling actually means and why it may or may not be for you. When I got into my photography business, from what I could see, it looked like the only path forward to making more money was to become an educator, to sell courses, to get into digital products, or to get into coaching, whatever. Now, that is true for some people. Look at me now. I am getting into education with this podcast and with it, but it's because I love it, right? If you don't love mentoring people or educating, this is not the only path. If you love taking photos or if you love writing, you can continue to run a business where you are doing what you love if it's not education. I think a lot of people just think like, oh, well, I guess the next step is to become an educator. And like, no, that is not necessary. I've been doing this throughout my life. Back when I was a software engineer, I was always mentoring people. This is just like part of my soul. So that's why I do it. But I also see the option and the path where I don't have to if I don't want to. So outside of education, I think the other path that people think that they have to take to continue growing is to build out an agency, which means hiring employees, hiring other people to help you do the work. So in photography, what that looks like is maybe hiring an associate photographer to go out and do shoots when you are already booked or maybe you're not available. It could mean bringing in an in-house editor or bringing on like a creative director or doing like all of these other things that help support running a photography business, but maybe you don't have the capacity to do it yourself. So I have a little bit of experience here because I started inadvertently building an agency. In 2023, I moved across the country from the Bay Area, California to Boston, Massachusetts. I was running a photography business essentially on my own. I had a lot of contractors, but I was doing all of the photography while I was in California. I loved it. It was great. And what happened was my husband ended up getting a full-time job offer in Boston. We'd always wanted to live on the East Coast, so bing, bang, boom, we up and left. Now, where did that leave my photography business? I have a steady stream of returning clients, of incoming clients, mostly because my website, when you Google Bay Area brand photographer right now, I'm typically the first result, and that's a pretty commonly searched term. I did that on purpose. So I had all of this SEO amazingness that I wanted to capitalize on. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to just lose out on all of this business because I'm moving. And the seed had already been planted. I had already, for the last year, been thinking about bringing on an associate photographer because I thought that's what I needed to do, right? I was booked out. I was pretty busy. Sometimes I would have to turn down people because they wanted a date that I didn't have available. So I said, okay, let me start looking for an associate photographer. So this kind of accelerated that process. I moved across the country. I'm still getting leads for California, but I physically can't be there. So before I left, I started working with my amazing associate photographer, and she started shadowing me on shoots, assisting me. And then eventually we had her first gig where she was the lead photographer. So I'm in Boston. I'm still doing the client acquisition. I get on the sales call. I'm doing all of the planning. I'm doing all the communication with the client. I'm doing the post-processing, all of that stuff. The only thing I'm not doing is being on site on photo shoot day. So that is where my photographer would come in and do the photos. She did an amazing job. And at first I was like, oh, this is cool. I can make money at home and not be on site to do photography. Like, awesome. Very cool. It seemed very exciting and flashy at the time because all of a sudden a lot of my time was freed up. It was a very shiny thing. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, maybe I can bring on more photographers. So here's where I started realizing that that wasn't quite aligned with my goals or with what I like to do. So after she did more and more of these shoots, I realized that I was getting more and more tired of managing this because the best part about being a photographer is taking pictures. All of a sudden, I'm doing all of the admin work, all the stuff that I don't really like to do, but is worth it when I can do the photo shoot. But then I don't even get the creative fulfillment of making the thing, of doing the photos. I'm just doing all of the boring parts. So I started growing resentful of my own business, and I didn't like that. I don't like the way that feels. Other things to keep in mind when you grow an agency model like this is you have a lot more admin work. There's a lot more like emails, back-end stuff, coordination, checking to see if the client is available when your photographer is available, making sure you get the photographer's files on time and making sure that you can coordinate schedules so that you can deliver them on time. And there's just at least twice the amount of communication and overhead. You got to double check. You're not just checking against your schedule, you're checking against your photographer's schedule and your client's schedule. That's just so much admin work that I wasn't expecting to deal with. So that's one thing. The other thing, when it comes to growing an agency, especially when you are doing an in-person service like brand photography, the expectations are different. My business name is Emily Kim Photography. So when someone that shows up to a photo shoot that's not Emily Kim, even though they know this is happening, right? We've communicated this, there is still some kind of unspoken or unsaid barrier or feeling where people are just like, oh, well, this isn't Emily Kim, so what's that about? You know, and my photographer did such an amazing job. This is something that we were constantly talking about and trying to see like, okay, what can I, Emily Kim, do better to communicate this so that people understand that I picked you for a reason? It took me a long time to find my photographer. I picked her for a reason, right? I trust her. So how can I transfer that trust to my client? Lots of things that I just wasn't expecting to happen. I think also because I am not on set the day of, I'm not, doing the photos. I'm just this like removed third party entity that they never meet in person because I'm doing these calls virtually. I think that adds a layer of a communication barrier. It's so hard to explain. I don't even know how to explain it. But people, I felt like, become a little bit more on guard. I don't even know how to explain it. There's just a communication barrier when you're not there on set to build that relationship. So these were all unseen problems that I wasn't really anticipating. Something that I had considered is, well, maybe because my business name is Emily Kim Photography, they're expecting me. Maybe if I rebranded, that bit would have gotten a little bit easier and easier to communicate. If I was, I can't even think of it, like Sunshine Studio or something, right? You can have one of the Sunshine Studio lead photographers or whatever, some business name that's not your name. Maybe that gets a little bit easier, but I'm not interested in rebranding. That was just not interesting to me. So these are all things that I learned while inadvertently building a studio. I did this because I had to. I had this business coming in. I still needed to make money, even though I moved across the country. And there was going to be some lag time between when I moved to Boston and when I could start booking brand photography gigs. And I wanted to focus more on education. So inadvertently ended up building the studio. And to be honest, after being in this setup for a year, I really don't think it's for me long term. Now, we still have some clients that we will serve because we love working with them. And I still go back to the Bay Area every once in a while to work with clients. As much as I really don't like that cross-country flight, I think that is the preferred way for me to run my business. I want to maintain that client relationship. I want to have creative control over the photos. I like taking photos. And when I hire an associate to do that for me, it takes the fun out of it for me, which led to more admin work, more overhead, and more burnout because I'm doing all the not fun stuff and it's just not fulfilling. The other downside to having an agency is now all of a sudden you have more people relying on you. I did not hire an employee. Whenever a gig would come in, would hire my associate photographer for that gig. But I also felt a little bit responsible for her success too. If I'm not getting clients, then she's not making money with me in this setup. And I don't like that responsibility either. I don't think that means that I'll never have a team, but I, in this way, don't want to run a team of photographers and have them looking to me to book gigs like this. I think I like being responsible for myself, for my own photography gigs. So that's my take on running an agency and on scaling an agency in that way. So what will I do instead? My business, again, might look a little bit different from you because I am focusing on education. That is how I am choosing to quote unquote scale, or it's not even scaling, right? I'm not making more money right now because I'm new in education. A pivot is always going to change things in your business, but this is how I'm choosing to run my business moving forward. In terms of scaling or growing my revenue, this is a little bit more straightforward, right? Because it's not a one-to-one thing. I would love to eventually take brand deals for my YouTube videos or sponsorships for this podcast. I have some digital products. I have some other things that we can talk about later, but that's how I am choosing to grow my business. Now, if you are a one-to-one creative service provider, if you listen to my last episode, I shared with you my revenue and my profit and loss for my best year yet in photography, where my primary service was fulfilling one-on-one photography services. If that was the path that I wanted to continue on now and be known for doing personal brand photography, what I would do is focus on being the personal brand photographer for someone or the copywriter for someone. You want to be the one that someone wants to save up for, right? So to do that, you really have to dive into personal branding and make it so that you are the irresistible option for your perfect match ideal client. This is a whole other topic that we can get into on the power of personal branding, but that is what I would do if I wanted to have one-to-one photography services or one-to-one creative services be my primary income. Because then when you are the option, you can raise your prices, you can charge a premium because people want you. You need to generate demand for your service. I feel like I've done that to an extent with my brand photography business. I am still traveling back to the Bay Area, but because I am focusing more on education, like this podcast, like my YouTube channel, it's not something that I am actively focused on 100% of the time. I will do another episode on all things personal branding. I mean, there will probably be many episodes on personal branding because it's so important if you want to build a one-to-one business like this. But that is what I would do if you want to still do your service and grow that way. Other things that you can do, and something that I've implemented in my brand photography business, you can still bring on a team, right? But for auxiliary services or related services. So something that I do with my brand photography clients, I include hair and makeup. I include that in the price of my package, and then I contract out the hair and makeup artist. And because I work with the same people, it's a very easy thing. They're so used to it, and it's a little bit different because I obviously cannot do people's hair and makeup. That would be a total disaster. But because I am bringing on the hair and makeup artist, I'm in charge of finding that and organizing that for the client. You can still upcharge like a 20% or 15% fee on whatever your hair and makeup artist is charging because you are spending time organizing that, right? You're delivering more value. So that's typically what I do. So I'm still increasing my revenue just slightly, but I'm delivering massive value to the client by doing that. I also bring in a wardrobe stylist sometimes for my shoot, actually most of the time for my shoots. So we're still adding value, which increases the price, but it isn't really taking a ton of your time. So ask yourself, how else can you add value to the service that you're already providing if you want to be raising your prices and charging more money for that? Whether or not you decide to quote unquote scale your business is totally up to you. I feel like I have been talking smack about growing an agency and growing a team. It just depends on your own goals. What do you really want? If you really love the idea of having a team and growing a team, by all means, go for it. You can 100% do that. I am just sharing that it wasn't the choice for me. It wasn't the path that I wanted to take. And there are other options available. So if you need brainstorming, if you have any questions, join us in the free Profitable Creatives Facebook group. You can just search it. I'll leave the link in the show notes. And let me know if there are any other topics around this that you would love to hear about. I've mentioned before, but because this is a new podcast, if you are enjoying the content, I would so love if you could follow and subscribe in whatever listening app that you use and leave a review. It's so helpful as a new podcast to have ratings and reviews. It can be as short or as long as you want it, but I would really appreciate it if you enjoyed this episode. Tell me what you liked about it. Tell me what you want to hear more of. I so appreciate you taking the time to leave the feedback and leave a review, and I will see you in the next episode.